chapter 27, verses 1 to 11. Volunteers? Go ahead.
The daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clan of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They approached the entrance to the tent of Eleazar the priest, the leaders in the whole assembly, and said, "Our father died in the desert. He was not among Korah's followers, who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no son. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives." So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, What Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and turn their father's inheritance over to them. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, turn his inheritance over to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. And this should be a legal requirement for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay. And then Numbers 36, starting in verse 5, verses 5 to 9. Numbers 36, 5 to 9. Anybody want to read? Go ahead.
Then at the Lord's command, Moses gave this order to the Israelites. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. This is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry within the tribal clan of their father. No inheritance in Israel is to pass from tribe to tribe, but every Israelite shall keep the tribal land inherited from his forefathers. Every daughter who inherits land in any Israelite tribe must marry someone in her father's tribal clan, so that every Israelite will possess the inheritance of his fathers. No inheritance may pass from tribe to tribe, but each Israelite tribe is to keep the land it inherits.
Okay. All right, I think that I have one more here, but I think that's enough. So if you keep all those things in your head at the same time, or maybe you can't, but anything you want to bring out from the scriptures we read, anything you notice that stands out, as far as the involvement of men and women in the Jewish religion at this time, and the way things were handled. Anything you want to emphasize or point out?
I think it's important to remember the way that they honored the women who were getting the inheritance, because a lot of places in the world, people were just properties. And, if you have a child and, well, that's just property. But this is not. They own the property as well. They're a part of the ones receiving it. That honor is given to them. It wasn't like she doesn't have a right. She does have a right. And it goes to her. And in fact, they even went so far as to take care of a child. When she didn't have a child, they would marry it through the family to make sure the child was provided as best it could. But it's interesting how God's word respects the women as well as the men in their roles.
Okay, anything else? Did you forget everything? Okay. I mean, I can certainly point out some things, but before I start mouthing off, I wanted to give you guys a chance. So what did you learn from those passages about men and women, as far as the intended meeting is concerned, as far as marriage is concerned, being a Nazirite, offering their skills. I mean, those are things that we read. Yes, Roberta?
I thought, in the first passage, the one that I think it was about the, when they were bringing things to build the tabernacle.
Right.
And it said, kind of emphasized to use their talents. The women who, it was like the women who were skilled in this labor, or the men who, so the women and the men both certainly could contribute to it, but it kind of seemed to emphasize to use your talents.
Okay. And also, in that passage, the women evidently had some ownership of property. It wasn't like, okay, the husband brings everything. The women, I mean, I don't know if they mentioned jewels, for example, and precious metals and things. So maybe some of those women were bringing some of their jewelry, which is a big deal in ancient cultures. And they had a different monetary system from us. Jewels and gold and silver was the family wealth. And they were given an opportunity, if so moved, to get of some of the family wealth. Anything else? Yes?
When it comes time for the women to turn it over to the man, does she have to give her jewelry over to him too, so she winds up with a house and a family, and he'll take care of her?
Well, no, because, I mean, that's what I just said. They were giving jewelry. They were making the
He
decision.
gave it to them.
We don't know. They may have
Oh.
inherited it. They may have
They
bought
could
it.
inherit the jewelry, but not the land.
Well, no, they do inherit the land. That's what
They
they
have to give
said.
it up.
If there were no sons, the daughters inherited the land.
But this passage is a free will gift offering contribute to the building of the tabernacle.
Yeah, what Roberta's talking about is not inheriting land. It's talking about giving gifts to the temple. It's a different subject.
Okay.
Anybody else? I noticed something here. Just sort of breezed by, but it's kind of interesting, you know, some of the things you hear about that culture and the way things work. Numbers 36, verse 6, it says, "This is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry within the tribal clan of their father." And the concern there being that the property, remember how God divided up Israel at the very beginning when they first took over the land? He wanted those tribal boundaries to be preserved. So they could not marry outside the clan. But within the clan, they could marry whomever they wanted. Remember that the next time somebody tries to tell you otherwise. They did have some choice. It wasn't all arranged. Anything else? Were you surprised by the Nazirite vow?
I did not remember the women to do that.
Neither did I. Who's a famous Nazirite in the Old Testament?
Samson.
Yeah, Samson. And so when I think Nazirite, I generally think of Samson. You know, the sort of the hero. But women could also commit themselves in this way, and it wasn't necessarily for life. If you read the whole passage, there was a period of time that could be associated with that vow. But that's very interesting. A woman or a man, they could devote themselves to the Lord's service in this way. So, anything else? And if you think of things, you know, we can come back later. These things will, I know, I got some feedback that all this stuff in Leviticus was sort of dry and not really sure how it's relevant. I mean, we wanted to present these things because it is in some sense relevant. I mean, it talks about, you know, the roles of men and women in in the context of the tabernacle, which of course we don't have anymore. But nonetheless, even then, there were these roles, and the women were significantly involved, using their talents and skills. In fact, I will point out that, what was it, Numbers 27, beginning in verse 11. You remember that whole passage? These daughters who were without brothers, they approached the entrance of the tent of the meeting and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly, and said, "Our father died in the desert." So these women spoke up. There was an issue, and they presented it to the assembly. They were not struck down. They were listened to. So that's something else, I think, to point out. So are we ready to go on to...
I'd like to make one more observation
Go
before
ahead.
we move on. And this is coming to the realization that things are different than we thought before. When I was a kid, I was raised, God gave the law, God gave the law, God gave the law. And I knew the law. You know, I studied it, knew the Ten Commandments and all the things. And but when I got older, I found out that there were already laws everywhere. In fact, my master's degree is on all the laws that were around. Well, why did God choose these instead of the other opinions men have of law? Because we live in a time now where law on top of law, you could break the law and you didn't know you were because you haven't read it yet because there are so many rules out there. And we need to remember that a lot of people are doing things that are wrong, but they don't know what God thinks. And when he told us, or gave the parameters of the Old Testament, he's showing us what he wants to reward. And yes, women were rewarded. And I think but God also had a different mold for the men, and we have to spend time to find out what that is.
Yeah, and going along with that, in one of those passages when they read the whole law, you know, there were periods in Israel's history where the people kind of, they needed to be re-educated. Like during the time of King Josiah, where they found the book of the law, and oh my goodness, and there's a whole story there where the law had to be presented to the people. In the passage we read, it said everyone who was able to understand. So this was not, you know, all the infants and all the very young children, but both men and women who were able to understand were expected to listen to the law. So they knew. It wasn't only the men. You know, it's like Fiddler on the Roof. You sort of get the impression that the guys read the Bible and the women don't know anything. And I don't know if that's really a fair presentation of Jewish culture, Orthodox Jewish culture, or not. I'm not Jewish. But that's not the picture that's presented here. The women knew what was going on as far as the law is concerned and what God expected. So with that, why don't we turn to Proverbs chapter 31, beginning in verse 10. I don't know, maybe we should take turns on this. This is a pretty long passage, and it's a very important one, too, for our study. Let me ask, first of all, who would like to volunteer to read part of this, and then I'll divide it up. Okay, so Andrew, so I got one. Anybody else want to read part of this? Okay, Myron? No ladies want to read part of this? Come on. This is your passage. Okay, Eleanor? And Cordelia? Okay, so I think I've got enough. So I have Andrew, Eleanor, Myron, and Cordelia, right? So let's see. So Andrew, why don't you read verses 1 to 9? Eleanor, why don't you read verses 10 to 16? And then Cordelia, you can read verses 17 to 24. And Myron, you can read the rest. Everybody got that? All right. Go ahead, Andrew.
The words of King Lemuel. the oracle which his mother taught him. What, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, or your ways to that which destroys kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, lest they drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more. Open your mouth for the dumb, for the rights of all the unfortunate. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and needy.
A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She's like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard.
She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle of her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes.
Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellent, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her words praise her in the city gates.
Okay. So before we get into the questions on section 4, I just want to point something out, kind of interesting. So this passage is part of something that's called the sayings of King Lemuel, and I'm not sure who King Lemuel was. But it's interesting to note the sayings of King Lemuel, an oracle his mother taught him. So this is a mother's wisdom, evidently inspired wisdom, presented to, I guess, a future king. It's kind of neat. And in the first 9 verses that Andrew read, I mean, we usually start at verse 10, right? But in the first 9 verses that are kind of an introduction to this thing, is kind of an overview of righteousness. And in particular, in verse 8, it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." If you translate that into a mom's kind of role in the family, there's a tie in there, right? The children are, in some sense, destitute. They have physical needs that must be met. Sometimes children get in fights and they get in arguments. And that's where it's a challenge for a parent to be fair, to judge fairly. So, verses 1 to 9 we usually cut off from this, but it's a good segue into the wife of noble character passage. So now let's talk specifically about the wife part. Character traits. So you know what a character trait, right? It's sort of a general description of somebody's personality and how they conduct their life. This person is hardworking or whatever. So what are some of the character traits that are brought out here for this wife of noble character? What are some admirable things?
She's a positive person.
Very much so. Doesn't sound like she's down in the dumps. She's going all the time. Yes.
Her husband's got complete confidence in her, like he knows she's there.
Right. She can be trusted. They know each other well. They understand each other.
She's diligent.
Yes. I should write some of these things down. Trusted. Diligent. Industrious, I'll say. What else?
She fears God.
Yes. In fact, that's right. That's kind of the conclusion, isn't it? Verse 30. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And the implication is that all these traits are character traits of a woman who's godly. This is what godliness should produce in a woman. Fears God.
She's
Yes.
a very helpful person because she gives to the poor and helps them, so she probably is a very good person in terms of learning.
Yes. And in fact, I think the very end ties into that, June, because it says, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So what she is doing not only blesses her own household, but it's clear to others in the community that she's somebody special. Were you gonna say something?
She works hard. She makes her own decisions, and she's part of the community. She knows what's going on, and her arms are strong for her tasks. So she's a strong, busy, connected woman.
Yeah.
If you notice the way she appropriates the dark time of the day, she gets open while it's dark, and she runs her light at night to continue to work. She works longer than just the daylight. Hard work.
This is something that a lot of, I think some, maybe modern men don't appreciate about our wives, particularly when there's a family with children. The work with the children does not begin at 9 a.m. and it doesn't end at 5 p.m. And even if she's a working mom or a partly working mom, that's still true. And I mean, it's something us guys maybe need to take into account. There's a tendency for us, speaking for myself, but I know other men too. They go, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to go home, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to read the paper, I'm going to listen to music or whatever. It's not entirely fair, particularly if you've got a family with children. So what else? Yes.
She's compassionate. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. And also, she looks ahead. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, because she already has clothes and she makes beds, so she's always a step ahead. She thinks in the future and prepares for it.
Yeah. I mean, in our house, our refrigerator has notes on it, very few of which are written by me. And it's a long list of things that our house needs. And on another part of the kitchen, on the counter, is another list or set of lists. All the things that need to be done for Concord Academy, Carl's phone bill needs to be paid, whatever. Guess who does that? It's not in my handwriting. Not to embarrass my wife, but I'll bet I'm not alone. I'll bet there's a picture similar to that in a lot of our homes. And that's exactly what this is describing, that kind of thing. Yes, Joe?
Very self-motivated. You know, there's nobody standing over her with a whip saying you have to do this, you have to do this. It's all self-motivation to do. She knows what she needs to do and she goes and does it.
That's very important. And, you know, sometimes conservative religion, Christianity, definitely Islam, and I've never been in the Middle East, so I don't know if the stereotypes are true, but, you know, the idea of the wife being sort of like this slave that doesn't know anything and can't do anything, that's just not the picture here. I mean, maybe there are cultures that behave that way, but that doesn't seem to be the ideal, according to this passage. It says, let's see, where did I want to point out? What about the vineyard thing? Did anybody pick up on that? So she considers a field and buys it, and out of her earnings she plants a vineyard. That's going to strike a lot of nerves with some people, depending on their point of view, about women and work. But what are the implications there?
She has money and she can do with it as she sees fit.
Yeah, her earnings. I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't studied the Hebrew here, but it sounds like she has some kind of connection with the financial aspect of the community. Yes.
In verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them.
Yes.
And supplies the merchant with sashes.
Yes.
So she even physically helps her family.
So she does have some involvement with the economy, the local economy. In fact, if she's talented and skilled and makes really nice linen garments, maybe that's one of the reasons she's recognized at the city gate. Who knows? Maybe those elders sitting there are wearing some of the cloth that she produced. It's kind of neat to think about. But, you know, she considers a field and buys it. She plants a vineyard. That field isn't necessarily in her backyard, right? Well, I won't go too much further. But you see what I'm saying, is that she is part of the community, and not just her household, but her influence expands out in the community because of her talents, because of her initiative, and because of her character. It does break down some stereotypes, I think. Anything else? Yes.
We haven't mentioned that she speaks with wisdom and faithful instruction.
Right, just like King Lemuel's mom. Hopefully her children are learning some things from her that they will, when they grow up, they'll remember, they'll put into practice. Godly things, including obviously the unspoken things, right, for example, and all the different things that we've talked about. So if we were to describe her in terms of roles, sort of the next question, what are her roles? I mean, if we wanted to make sort of a bulleted list, you know, what does she do or what are her responsibilities? What would go on that list?
Management.
Yes. Household management. I think that's right. The list that I talked about earlier, that's part of that, right? If you run a business, you've got to do that same thing. What do my employees need? What are the office supplies? It's the same kind of an idea. So management. What else?
You have to check up on the people too. Like an overseer.
Yes. So you're talking about the family, I guess, and her servant girls and all that sort of thing? oversight,
Supervisor.
right, the household, if it's a household with servants, you know, and if she's there most of the time, then if the husband's out working in the field, she's gonna be the one who knows what's going on. Yes,
But probably also oversees workers. I'm pretty sure she did not plant the vineyard by herself. I'm pretty sure she bought it and had, yeah, but,
Well, she
right,
was a
servant
household.
girls, I mean, in the house, that's what I want to say. If she buys a vineyard, a field somewhere and plants a vineyard, I don't think she's the one who puts in all the plants. She's probably hiring people who plant the vineyard.
Well, when
Yes.
we
it's
said-
certainly possible, I mean, it depends on how much of a woman of means she is and how big the vineyard is, but, yeah, I mean, it doesn't
I
seem
don't
to
know
be
if I could
excluded
plant
here.
the vineyard.
She
But yeah,
talks-
it's
yeah.
not written there explicitly, but, you know.
Well, I
Yeah.
think with the management, I kind of
Yeah.
thought whoever said management, that kind of covers them. She definitely managed her household. She managed her servants, she managed her family, she, whether you want to say it was oversight or supervisory, or, she was definitely, I think in a management role in a lot of different areas.
Okay. Anything else?
Why?
So we have management, we have oversight and supervision. There's other things we mentioned too. Cordelia?
Caretaker.
Huh?
Takes care, she's a caretaker of her children and of the needy and poor,
Okay.
and her husband.
Hold on.
Yes?
I think
Wife and a mother.
what I see in all of this is God gave women a gift and she oversees it. So, you know, some people don't get out of the house to do this or this or this, but whatever gift they have, God expects them to use it. Now, he's talking about women because he was told this by his mother. This is the way women are, and he's got to learn. And we got to understand the teaching part of this is God gave a gift to women, and you ought to recognize it. You ought to recognize it.
Yeah. One thing that nobody's mentioned is she teaches too. She teaches her children. So I'm gonna add to the list teacher. What about the making stuff? What's that? What kind of person makes things?
Creator.
Yeah, she's a craftsman. So there's certain skills, certain what we would call craft skills, that she has mastered to the point where she can actually make money with it. So she has craftsmanship. So I guess the role there would be a craft person. What else can we pull out of this passage?
She supports her husband. Her husband's respected in the city gates and all that, so it's mentioned under her, so I suppose she supports him and gives room that he can be there and do his work there.
Yeah, that's important. So let's follow that. Do you remember when we were looking at the passages in Genesis, when God created man and woman? So we're looking at this passage here, which has a lot of detail as far as all the different things that a wife of noble character would do and the way that she lived. But how can you tie that back to the creation story in Genesis? You see what I'm asking? How does this passage, with all of its detail, how does it reflect God's original creation of Eve? Because presumably God is pleased with this picture. And so it's not inconsistent with his creation of woman to begin with. So I guess I'm asking, do you remember well enough what we read in Genesis to be able to see the tie-in between the things in this passage and the description of a woman? Yes.
Let man find out before he gave him Eve that he needed a companion to
Okay,
fill in the holes of his life.
so all these things that we've listed, they all meet different needs. And she's meeting those needs, so that's excellent. Any other way, I mean, it's hard probably to be terribly detailed, because there isn't that much detail in Genesis. But how is Eve described? Huh?
Help me.
Yes. I will make a helper suitable for him. And when we read that passage, we were asking, well, what exactly does a helper do? What does that mean? There wasn't really any detail there. And we even kind of argued back and forth a little bit. Well, does she go out in the field or not? You know, is it beyond just making children? I think this passage helps answer that question. This is a more expanded definition of what a helpmeet or helper is. And as I think it was Eleanor, one of you, I've forgotten now already who was, who pointed out, as far as supporting her husband, that's the helper part. That's what it means, to help. And there's a lot to it. There's a lot of creativity involved, a lot of energy, a lot of freedom involved too. She does take initiative. She has decisions that she has to make. So, anything else? We should probably end, unless you have a burning comment. And we can continue our discussion next week, of course. I think we've covered it fairly well, but we'll revisit it, because this is important. Ziggy, would you like to close us in prayer? Okay?
Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful that we could study your word in detail this morning. We're thankful for the word that you provided us, the information that you've given us. Help us to discern